Hi everyone, Happy New Year. This is me, Debra, back with the In Conversation chat shows. I just really felt when I was looking on Facebook last week and reading some of the comments from a friend that I've invited to join us today that we should have him on the chat show. So it's brilliant to have the amazing Dr. Andy Knox with us today. And I love the fact that you describe yourself in your bio, Andy, as a husband, dad and friend before you start talking about yourself as the Director of Population Health for Morecambe Bay, which sounds so impressive. You're a husband, dad and friend. So do you just want to, and we go way back, I mean, you were, when you were studying in Manchester, I think, is it 20 years ago? Because you look quite young.
Yeah, thank you, Debra. Yeah, we met 25 years ago, Debra, when I was 15. Yeah, back at Spring Harvest, when you were speaking in the youth venue, and I was so impressed with what you said. It actually was what made me come to Ivy Cottage when I was in Manchester. And then we hung out for a few years, didn't we? I came to Manchester when I was 19. And we were there for 14 years in total, actually, before we moved up to Morecambe Bay. So still, Manchester's got such a special place in our heart. Love that city so much. And, you know, hugely grateful to you for the welcome that you and Frank gave to me and to Kat, and all the encouragement you gave us over the years. It was really wonderful. So, yeah, so I'm married to Kat, who is my best friend, and she is currently training to be a psychotherapist for children. A real passion of hers, working with kids who are having relational difficulties with their parents or having behavioural problems at home. So she's working in a school setting, doing some kind of play therapy there, which she absolutely loves. And then we've got 3 kids: Joshua, who is doing GCSEs this year, or supposed to be, not quite sure exactly how that's going to end up. Amelia, who is just this beautiful, joyful, incredible girl, and Samuel, who is our live wire 10-year-old. Wow. Yeah, so we have a very lively and noisy household, but it's certainly one that's full of lots of energy.
Can imagine. Yeah. And have any of them got your musical skills?
That's very kind. Actually, Josh. Yeah, we run a little community choir here up in Carnforth, actually, which has got about 100 people sing together every Monday, which is real fun. It's one that we do a lot of work similar to Rock, actually, talking to communities about how we can be more healthy and well together, how we can look after each other better. And in the town near where we live, again and again, people said there's nowhere for us to sing together. And we moved, you know, slowly. We just started this choir about 6-7 years ago, and it's now 100 people every Monday night singing, and that's super fun. So yeah, Josh is a really good little pianist and plays sax as well, doing his GCSE music this year. Amelia is actually a phenomenal dancer. She's a brilliant ballet dancer, really moving and beautiful to watch her do that, and she's always singing. And then Sam is our trumpeter, and boy, does the whole neighborhood know about it when he plays. But yeah, we music's a big part of our family life together.
Have you got a basement or a loft that you put him in?
Thankfully, we live in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, we live in this little village called Silverdale, right in the on the coast. So we've got a barn, and they've got it's quite a long area where down the far end of the house where we make them do their music practice. Can be painful at times. Yeah.
Wow. I remember you for being a really, you know, your faith is really a big thing in your life, isn't it? I don't know whether that's changed over the last 20 years. It's probably changed and evolved, but do you just want to talk a little bit, you know, as a GP, but also, well, how would you describe yourself as a GP? Because your role's a little bit wider than that, isn't it?
Yeah, so I work in a practice. I'm a GP partner in a practice here in Morecambe Bay called Ash Tree Surgery. We've got 26,000 patients in our practice. So it's kind of a medium-sized one. We've got a couple of practices down the road with about 55, 60,000 patients. So I work half-time as a GP. And I love that. I love the privilege of holding the space for people to come talk about whatever's going on for them, and see myself more as like a coach, really, drawing alongside people, helping them make choices about what kind of treatments they do or don't want, what choices positively or negatively they want to make about their life, or their mental health, their physical health, and how all those things combine and intertwine together. And then the rest of my time is kind of divided between a few different things. The role is Director of Population Health for Morecambe Bay, and I've also just become the Clinical Director for the whole of Lancashire and South Cumbria, which is great. It's 1.3 million people thinking about how we can be healthy and well together and look after that, and I absolutely love that. And then I do a bit of teaching. So I'm a teaching fellow at Lancaster University, both in the medical school, but also in the School of Sociology. And I work particularly in something called the Centre for the Alternative to Economic and Social Injustice, which is something I'm really passionate about.
Wow.
Yeah, so my faith is a big part of everything that I am and do, and flows through all of my work. I would say it's probably changed quite a lot since the days I was in Manchester, but if anything, it's got deeper and richer, and probably a lot more pragmatic and earthed.
Yeah.
I think being a student, you can have a lot of ideals about how you think the world should be, and I know a lot less than I knew then, and I have a lot more questions now, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I'd love to talk to you more about your work in a minute, and just really unpack that, because it seems like, I mean, I know Cumbria, for example, has got some quite scary figures at the moment, haven't they, around COVID. We can, of course, talk about that, and also links between poverty and health, poverty, inequality and health. I know you're really passionate about that, so I'd love to talk to you about that. But before that, kind of a bit more about faith. Just for people listening, has your faith been tested? Well, that's the big question. Has your faith ever been tested? I'm sure it has, if you're a human person. But has your faith been tested by the extra pressures that we've seen in the last, 12 to 18 months?
That's a good question. I don't feel like my faith has been tested, because I don't feel like my faith is in a far off God who somehow forgets us or disappoints us. My faith is in a God who is God with us, right? So I don't feel like God leaves us to suffer. I think he's with us in it. So my faith perhaps feels more real. And more deep, and more just that very sense of real presence. But for sure, my character and some of the things I wrestle with when I'm busy, or I'm overwhelmed, or I'm stressed, or I'm stretched, I would say that's where some of my real hard, deep works had to be. Because I'll be honest, some days I wake up and I feel incandescent rage or anger with some of the injustice around some of what we're experiencing and what's going on. And learning how to deal with that, learning how to cope with my emotions and still be present and still be kind and still choose the way of love. I would say that's probably been my biggest growth area over the last few months.
That's really powerful. That is a really good lesson for us to take on board, especially when we're hearing it from somebody who is on the front line. I mean, I've loved the fact that we've been out on the doorstep applauding the wonderful NHS, people like yourself, others who are working long hours under these heavy weights and these terrible circumstances, and that's been great. But I'm sure that we don't often understand what the real pressures are. Have you felt supported by the community?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been beautiful, actually. It's been very moving. I think I've been close to tears a few times, stood out listening to people banging their pans and clapping their hands and cheering their hearts out, because it really has felt like, for those of us in the NHS, that the nation's really been behind us. And I hope people in the caring industry have felt the same. And actually, it's not just the NHS who've been working hard. I think we should have been clapping for teachers. I feel like we should have been clapping for the police. I feel like we should have been clapping for the community voluntary faith sector. So many people have just got out of their comfort zones and rolled up their sleeves and poured themselves out in love for community over these last few months. It's been incredible to see that. But the sense of support that I've had personally, from the community, from family, from friends, from patients. It's been absolutely astounding. It's been really, really lovely, and a huge thank you to everyone who's actually bothered to just say thanks, or just, you know, encourage people in the NHS or in care, because it's absolutely massive. It really, really spurs us on.
That's amazing. As we kind of move on and look a little bit more at your work, I saw you getting your vaccine the other day on Facebook. It looked like a bit like a sketch, actually, for a comedy show. But you were getting your vaccine, and of course we're so encouraged that we're getting the vaccines, and that's all moving us forward, isn't it? So what is your message?
Yeah, that's great.
I believe there is still quite a big number of people, is it up to a third of people, who are a little bit unsure still about having a vaccine. What is your message about this vaccine, and are you hopeful that we can get this job done in a certain space of time?
I am. It's not going to be straightforward. You know, the reality is we're still trying to run busy days. So there's not a day where we don't have well over 100 people to call and triage and look after. And, you know, that's just in our practice. Well, actually, we have over 300 people to triage every day, and call and work out what's going on with them. And we invite people. We have telephone appointments, we have video appointments, we have face-to-face appointments. And then on top of all of that, we're trying to run a vaccine program as well. So it is stretching us for sure, but I feel really, really hopeful. You know, our teams are pulling out all of the stops. People are working their socks off. People are going above and beyond anything you can imagine to sort out the logistics, which are really, really complicated, especially with the Pfizer vaccine, and trying to get it delivered and kept at the right temperature, and then sorted out and made up and delivered in a certain time frame. There are loads of complexities with it, but people are working really hard. And so I would say to people, please do have the vaccine. I've had it. I really do believe it to be really well researched. I think that the safety trials have been really convincing. I think it's safe. I think it's highly effective. And I think it is honestly a little bit crazy not to have it in the state that the nation's in. If you look at some of the stuff that's ripping through South Africa and Brazil, if you see the state of where London's at right now, we need to get this vaccine into people, and we need to get ourselves as safe as we can, so that we can actually move on into the future together, without this having to be like a cloud over us. And I saw a very amusing thing on Facebook yesterday, with someone pretending to be in a call center having a conversation with someone who is like against having the vaccine, and she was saying, oh, so when you go to the airport, you ask the pilot to move over, do you? And you want to fly the plane, and when you go to the hairdresser, you want the hairdresser to move over so you can cut your own hair, and when was the last time that you had polio or smallpox? You know, vaccination has made a massive difference. After clean water, vaccination is the thing that has most transformed health in the world. And to think of this as some great conspiracy theory is, I honestly can't understand it as a doctor working hard in the health service right now. And I would implore people to trust us and to have the vaccine done.
Absolutely. Yeah. I took my dad the other day, and I was so impressed with, from arriving, it was at a church actually as well, and they're like a church centre in Sale. From arriving, they were lovely, smiling stewards, welcoming you in, telling you where to park. He was in and out in 10 minutes, and it was his own doctor.
Yeah, amazing.
Vaccine, and it was so nice because he's 86.
Lovely.
He did have a few questions, but we managed to get him through that. So I was so grateful.
Amazing. That voluntary response is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people will start to feel reassured as that if the elderly are going first, you know, for these vaccines, surely the rest of us can take their lead and follow suit. Yeah.
They're an amazing generation. There's all these old boys telling us all the stories of how they used to have their vaccines in the army, and they used to get like 6 in one day, and then they were made to scrub the floors, and they didn't know what everyone was moaning about. So yeah, they're an amazing generation.
We love them, don't we? I just want to encourage people to follow Andy Knox on Facebook, because he's not just doing things like getting his vaccine, he's also doing some great information for us about mental health and looking after our mental health. and how passionately important that is, and important to you, Andy. And you're giving us a lot of really good practical advice there. And we all struggle with mental health, so it's great to have that. But could you talk a little bit about that, and about how we haven't got an equal country, have we, in terms of people's opportunity with education, with health, with other things? And that poverty and inequality is leading to heightened problems with mental health and with, of course, our physical health.
Yeah, it is. It's something I feel hugely passionate about. You know, there have been honestly reports after reports after reports into government over the last 40 years, since the Black Report came into Thatcher's government, and then successive reports since that, and the phenomenal work of a guy called Professor Sir Michael Marmot over the last 20 years in particular. And they have highlighted this again and again. So, you know, where we are in Morecambe Bay, if you go to some of the most economically poor areas, and I don't really like using the word deprived, because a lot of the communities are like, we're not deprived people. We're just, but economically poor, you know, and the reality is that people growing up in those areas will die 15 years earlier than people who are living 2 or 3 miles down the road in a more wealthy suburb. And that is just not okay. Yeah. It isn't acceptable. And yet it has gone on and been perpetuated for many years. And actually, if you look at what's happened, particularly in the last 10 years, it's got worse. And it's got worse, particularly for women in our most deprived communities. And it's got worse for people living in our Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. And for me, that there's a real sense of justice, a real sense of social justice about this. And actually, we have to do something about it. And there's a lot of talk, isn't there, at the moment about building back better. And Michael Marmot's written a brilliant report saying, well, actually, we don't just want to build back better, we want to build back fairer. And we do need to take a moment together to pause and reflect on what the coronavirus has exposed for us around the levels of inequality and inequity of health in this country. And we need to not only take stock and go, oh, well, let's just go back even faster and further, and, you know, more exams for the kids, or more this or more. Let's stop, let's pause and ask ourselves some deeper and better questions about why we see such staggering levels of poverty and inequality. The destitution report released recently showed that we have over 500,000 children living in destitution in this country, 2 million adults. Those are shocking statistics, and we cannot just go back to how things were. There's a massive conversation, and that's why I love Rock. You're into having conversations, and we need to have better conversations together in society about how we're going to create an economy that genuinely works for everybody and looks after the environment that we live in. And Kate Raworth's written an amazing book called Doughnut Economics. And there's another economist called Marianna Mazzucato who's written a brilliant book called The Value of Everything. And there's another brilliant feminist economist called Katherine Trebeck who's written The Economics of Arrival. We need to get into the realm of economics more, because it's not just for boring old men in grey suits. Economics is about how you organize a household. It's about how you work together with the resources that you have to ensure that everybody has enough. And Jesus had a whole lot to say about that. His whole manifesto in Luke 4 is all, I've come to bring good news to who? To the poor. So where's the good news? At the moment, there isn't a lot of it. And there's a lot of perpetuating the same old story through the same old ways of doing things. And we need to stop if we're going to really have true population health, if we're going to have true equality and equity in society. We need to ask ourselves some much better questions about whether our economic models are currently fit for the future. And I've concluded that they're not, but there are some really, really exciting new experiments being done that we need to start taking part in.
I always love it when people start quoting the feminist revolutionaries who are changing things for the better in this nation. We will put some of the links in the chats and as people are watching this via Facebook, Andy, to some of those books that you've just been telling us about, because I think we have to be educated, don't we? We have
Absolutely.
We have to read, we have to learn, because it's not going to change overnight. You're almost saying it's going to need a radical reform rather than just a few band-aids. I was talking to one of our community leaders over in Northern Ireland this week. We've set up a mentoring scheme for families just to be referred,
Amazing.
For their health and their, some of the things that they're facing. And we heard about this lady last year. Sadly, she lost her job. She had a really good job, really well-paid job. She lost her job. Then her son was diagnosed with diabetes. That they just suddenly went from being a functioning household where everything was working fine to actually them needing to go to a food bank. And she said to us, I don't want to go to food bank. I used to donate to food banks, and now here's me going to a food bank. And you must know thousands of these stories.
Right.
We're able to get her a voucher from Tesco and get a gas, a top up, and a few other practical things. But what is the road to recovery, Andy? Give us 2 or 3 things that you think in this short to medium term it would look like, and people who are people of faith can pray, and people of faith can do and support. But what is this road to recovery for our nation right now?
First thing is, I think that we need to be really careful with our language, and we need to stop stigmatizing poverty. So a professor I work with, Imogen, has written another brilliant book called Stigma, The Machinery of Inequality. If you look at some of the comedy we watch, we laugh at the poor. If you look at some of the rhetoric we've heard, especially in the right-wing press, to be fair, but actually in a lot of the ways we even talk on the news, we talk about the poor as if they are feckless, as if they are either deserving or undeserving. Dorothy Day, I read this quote today, she said, since Christ, there is no such thing as deserving or undeserving poor. He never makes the distinction. So let's stop this horrible rhetoric about who deserves help and who doesn't deserve help. The journey of people into poverty is so complex and deeply spiritual and deeply, really, really complicated how people end up in poverty, but it can happen overnight. And it happens because of loads of varying factors together. So the first thing I would say is, let's stop pointing the finger. Let's stop blaming people and shaming people and making assumptions about them. And let's have the humility to stop and listen. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think that we need, I was thinking a lot about leadership the last few days and why leaders often make such crazy decisions and how they're often so far removed from the people who live in the reality of the situation all the time. And I think one of the greatest reasons we have so much poverty is because of proximity, or a lack of proximity. And one of the things I've been really passionately involved in over the last few years has been something called the Poverty Truth Commission. The idea of rebuilding South Africa after the apartheid, and it was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And Scotland then took on this idea of a Poverty Truth Commission, which then came to Leeds, and it's then come to Morecambe Bay. There's one in Salford, there's one in Blackpool, there's one in Epsom in Surrey, and there's 14 or 15 across the UK at the moment. And the idea is this, that we should stop making decisions on behalf of the poor without including them in the process. So the strapline of Poverty Truth Commission is, no decision about us without us is for us. And the difficulty is that people in positions of leadership—
Say that again, Andy.
Yeah.
That was really powerful.
So nothing about us without us is for us.
Wow.
So you don't get to make a decision on behalf of someone who you've never met or had never heard their story, or make assumptions about their lives. And the problem is, we're making assumptions. You look at the school meals voucher program at the moment, you look at stuff going on around education at the moment, you look at some of the decisions being made about austerity and who gets benefits and who doesn't get benefits, and whether people deserve their disability allowance or they don't. And I spend hours writing reports of appeal as a GP to say, how can you have possibly taken benefits off this person? This person can barely walk, let alone— it's maddening actually as a GP to be dealing with some of these scenarios and the difficulties we're dealing with around the benefit system in particular. It's so dehumanizing. But one of the things that we found is that by actually taking the lanyard off your neck, taking your important position off, getting out of the boardroom and actually sitting with people who are recovering from heroin addiction, or sitting with people who are street homeless, or sitting with a mum like you just described in Belfast, who's actually lost her job, or maybe had a mental health crisis, or had a child who's been ill and suddenly found herself on the breadline. Women are categorically much more struggling with poverty than men are. We've got a major problem in terms of the setup of our society and how continually patriarchal it is. Sorry, I'm getting on a right soapbox here. But what I would say is we need to, the second thing, apart from breaking down the stigma, is we need to break down the distance. We need to get leaders out into communities and genuinely listening to people, hearing their stories, and then asking them to be part of the decision-making process about what kind of services are needed, about how we change the future together, collaboration, co-commissioning, co-production. It's not about me hearing your story and then going and making a decision about you. It's about me hearing your story, being with you, and then together we walk into a different future, which empowers both of us to see and be in the world differently.
I can imagine people are feeling quite shocked at the moment listening to this, because you know you're a GP, you're a person in the health sphere, and here you are talking about economics, talking about the inequalities in people's lives, almost talking like a politician, obviously not with, you know, you're not a politician, but making comments about these things that are wrong within society. And I don't know what you felt, but I was looking the other day on Facebook about these school meals where parents are being given so-called £30 worth of food, and when you look at the picture on the screen, it doesn't look even like it's worth £30, let alone we're telling people what they have to eat as well. You must be
right.
I mean, that must be one of the examples that really winds you up, I would imagine. Yeah.
one of the many. I mean, how patronizing is that? How rude is that?
Yeah, it is. And you mean they might have an allergy to
dishonoring
cheese, and now you've got cheese slices and you've got to eat them whether you like them or not. So I'm with you 100%. Just to finish on a note, because you did say you were hopeful. I don't know whether you were an optimistic person or because of your faith you're hopeful, but just give us one last message on what we can expect in this next year that's going to give us hope.
Well, I do think that people have realized that we can't go back to the way things were. And that gives me hope, because if we can't go back, then we have to go forward. And forward is a good place to be going. We can't remain as we are, and no one wants to be in lockdown forever. So we're going to get vaccinated, and that gives us hope that there is something else coming. There is a future ahead of us that we're not in right now. We're in lockdown. We're in a hard, tight place, but there's an open space coming that's going to be there because we're getting ourselves vaccinated. But we're also recognizing where we were before, that was awful. We were running at such a pace. We were exhausted. We were using people and eating people up in the economy. We have massive injustice that we can't go back to. That is even being magnified in this moment. And it's made us all go, what does it feel like to rebuild a society together? And I think that's the question. You know, I wasn't a fan of Brexit, but Brexit's happened. Okay, so now we have to reimagine our place in the world. And I think we need a massive national conversation. What is the future of Great Britain? We're not a colonial power anymore. We're not, unfortunately, in my view, part of the European Union anymore. We can't tolerate this level of staggering inequality. So how are we going to move forward? And I think we've got questions, loads more questions than we've got answers right now. And what I don't want is fast fixes or the music going back on and us all singing songs and just getting back on with life as it was. We can't. But what gives me hope is that people don't want to. And so there's a moment of opportunity to hold a space to bring people together for a very radically different kind of conversation. Okay, so who are we becoming? What does it mean for us to live well together in the world? And that is a very, very, very hopeful conversation to have.
None of us would have wished to have had the year we had last year.
Right.
And so many people have suffered and are suffering. But if that is the thing that makes us behave differently for the long term, it will be, you know, the prompt, as it were. If we weren't doing it willingly, we have to live better lives, don't we, for the sake of the poor.